It's 5:05 and welcome into a Friday edition of the Carolina Journal News Hour. News Talk 1110 99.3 WBT. I'm Nick Craig. Good morning to you. We continue to track a very busy week in Raleigh with multiple state agencies and department heads appearing yesterday before the North Carolina House Oversight Committee to brief lawmakers on their respective landscapes and efforts to find and eliminate waste, fraud, and abuse within their various state agencies. The hearings come as state lawmakers gear up for the biennial budget negotiations, which will begin and will take place throughout the vast majority of this year. The purpose of the hearings with agency heads is to hear about what they do, how they do it, and if they're doing their job, according to committee co-chair and House Majority Leader Representative Brandon Jones out of Columbus County. The oversight comes amid a backdrop of national interest in government waste versus efficiency, which is being led and driven by the Trump administration up in Washington, D.C. We'll start off this morning with the Department of Revenue. Secretary of Revenue McKinley Wooten Jr. told members that his department's two main priorities were upgrading a 30-year-old technology system with a $50 million legislative appropriation and an RFP process underway and a contract expected by the fiscal year end. Also ensuring a stabilized workforce by maintaining a low vacancy rate, which is just 7.2% within the department, and reducing turnover to ensure skilled staff for revenue collection. Wooten told the committee, quote, "Technology is the top of the list at the Department of Revenue. What you may not know is that the department has run a technology system that is 30 years old, and so it's really important for us to move with the times and go about enhancing our technology." When it comes to performance metrics, Wooten told the committee that the department's key measures include efficient tax return processing, growing continuous revenue collection, consistency with the legislature's intent, and getting funds distributed in a timely manner, as well as taxpayer education. Further efforts to improve taxpayer convenience focused on modernized technology to offer a public-facing portal for easier tax processing akin to private sector convenience, with the head of the revenue saying, quote, "It's not unreasonable for a citizen and a taxpayer to expect the same electronic conveniences that they experience in their personal lives with private business." The department also works to eliminate tax fraud. Wooten told the committee members that the department intercepted some $966 million in fraudulent returns last year. That number jumped off the page to me. Asked if the North Carolina Department of Revenue is committing resources to any diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, Wooten assured the committee that there was no formal DEI programs within the Department of Revenue. He said past references of DEI in the department's strategic plan were not implemented and will be removed in the new administration's update. That was asked of pretty much every department head that spoke in front of this very lengthy committee meeting that ran up until about 3 o'clock yesterday afternoon. We'll talk about the Office of State Budget and Management with Kristen Walker coming up a little bit later on this morning, as well as we keep an eye on what's going on in Raleigh. It's now 5:08. You're listening to the Carolina Journal News Hour. We continue to recap what has been a very busy week in Raleigh inside of the North Carolina General Assembly. Dozens of committee meetings taking place over the last couple of days. To get an update on some regulatory reforms in a committee meeting earlier this week, Jeff Moore from CarolinaJournal.com joins us this morning on the News Hour. Jeff, it has been a whiplash week up at the GA. Tell us a little bit about this regulatory reform committee meeting that took place earlier in the week.
Yeah, so this is one of the very many meetings going on this week to get legislators' arms around just all the different state agencies, all the different stakeholders in the state and what they do, the kind of interests they represent, and the kind of solutions they may be looking for by way of government reform. So in the Regulatory Reform Committee, they had representatives from the North Carolina Retail Merchants Association as well as North Carolina Home Builders Association. And so they heard testimony from Andy Ellen, who's the chief counsel and director of the NCRMA there for the retailers, talking about the successful regulatory reforms that they've done in the past, things that seem ridiculous to any member of the public that we would micromanage businesses like this. But he listed things like businesses not being able to use certain parts of their parking lot to sell nursery stock if they're in a landscaping business. That one corner of the parking lot would be okay, but not another corner. Or down to the minute details of how they label eggs in a grocery store. And these are all things that the businesses, the employers that they represent at NCRMA have had to deal with. And they found some great success with working with lawmakers to make sure that those things get dealt with as soon as possible so you can smooth out all the regulations. So he came to give an overview of their association, some of their successful examples, and to urge lawmakers to continue on that path toward regulatory reform, noting that the most important thing to the employers is consistency of the regulations, that things aren't done arbitrarily, that they go through the rules review process. And we have a rules review board in North Carolina that actually examines what the rules are, if they're necessary, and whether or not they should really be on the book. So that's an added backstop that Mr. Ellen noted was important in North Carolina. But also he emphasized just to favor free market solutions for a lot of the problems that we run into, and people usually go kind of kicking and screaming to their local lawmaker and say, we need to pass a law about this or about that. But often it is the case that passing laws creates some ripple effects that turn into more problems for employers and employees. So we really emphasized having a free market approach to a lot of these issues, and where they see issues that the government intervention and regulation is really disrupting a market, that would be the most powerful ways to reform regulations, is to go ahead and remove those disruptions, make the playing field as even as possible for everybody involved.
Well, we've seen over the last couple of years, unfortunately, North Carolina didn't get the ranking last year from CNBC, but for the 2 years prior, we were #1 in the country for business. Obviously, Jeff, taxes play a large role into that, and we have a schedule right now in North Carolina. Could be some changes to it, but that business income rate is going to continue to decline. But the regulatory environment really is a huge thing, especially as we look at these more industrial jobs and industries that are making their way to North Carolina, where there's so much red tape, so much bureaucracy. That's got to be a pretty good thing to pull these businesses in by saying, hey, we're pretty lax on regulation, of course, keeping people safe, but we're going to allow you to operate your business.
Yeah, the headline numbers for personal and corporate income taxes get a lot of attention, but I think when you talk to business operators, executives themselves, they really point a finger at the regulation and making sure that those regulatory processes for drawing new regulations, for removing ones that are in the way, but also just making sure that they're consistent, that's the most important part from operating the business and seeing that through to the bottom line, because they can have a headline tax number that is the corporate rate could go all the way to 0. But if they have an environment where they are over-regulated and they are just suffocated, wrapped up in red tape, that profit actually doesn't matriculate down to the bottom line, because it ends up getting wrapped up in all the bureaucracy that they have to deal with. So that's a very big part of attracting businesses to the state that are currently outside the state, and a huge part of respecting the business owners, small and large, mind you. The Retail Merchants Association represents small business owners and larger businesses as well. But the people in the state that are creating a product or delivering a service, they need to get treated as beneficially as possible, and smoothing out those regulations is a very big component in attracting those businesses.
The second part of that meeting was dealing with housing and home building. We'll continue that discussion with Jeff Moore from the Carolina Journal coming up after this. You're listening to the Carolina Journal News Hour. Where it's now 5:14, News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. It's time to get a look at traffic on your Friday morning with Boomer Von Cannon.
Hey, thank you. or emergency situation station.
Hot. 20 minutes past the hour. Welcome back to the Carolina Journal News Hour. Tracking some statewide news this morning. A federal appeals court has given a Charlotte-Mecklenburg police officer by the name of Heather Loveridge another opportunity to seek immunity from a lawsuit after she mistakenly shot FBI officer Clarence Belton in 2019. The Fourth U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals ruled to send the case back to a trial judge, stating that the lower court did not properly analyze the issue of immunity. Loveridge shot Belton during a law enforcement operation at a Charlotte home while attempting to serve a search warrant, mistaking Belton for a suspect. She fired more than 10 rounds before realizing he was a fellow officer. Belton sustained severe injuries, ending his law enforcement career. He subsequently then sued Loveridge and the city of Charlotte for excessive force, negligent assault, and emotional damage. A district judge previously denied Loveridge's request for dismissal based on qualified immunity, citing disputed facts. However, the appeals court found that the judge failed to conduct the required legal analysis, including whether Loveridge violated a clearly established constitutional right. As a result, the court vacated the ruling and remanded the case for further proceedings. This happened all the way back in 2019, and the legal challenge does continue this morning. You can read more quotes on this story, including a full back and forth of some of the court filings in our or on our website this morning. The headline: Charlotte police officer gets second chance to seek immunity in shooting lawsuit, over at carolinajournal.com, where it's now 5:22. News Talk 1110 99.3 WBT.
We are continuing our conversation this morning with Jeff Moore from carolinajournal.com about a regulatory committee hearing that happened in the North Carolina General Assembly earlier this week. All right, Jeff, we talked about the retail and the merchant side of it. Home builders, that's another thing. There's no question about it. There's severe housing pressure here across the state of North Carolina. What did we learn in regards to regulation on that?
Yeah, so as part of this committee meeting, they heard from Chris Millis, who's head of regulatory affairs from the North Carolina Home Builders Association. So he talked about the housing affordability crisis, and in speaking to the Regulatory Reform Committee, he made sure to emphasize those kind of things, that they would like to see reform that would make it easier for home builders to actually meet the demand. We know anybody that's been trying to realize the dream of home ownership over the past few years knows that it's becoming harder and harder to do so. Rents are going up, and there are some real structural issues in the way of doing that. So he noted actually for these committee members that the median home price for a home in North Carolina right now is $420,000 thereabouts. And that is up about $160,000 over the past couple of years.
Wow.
So that's a pretty huge jump. And that means if you're going to qualify for a loan to purchase a home as a sole income earner, then that means you need to make about $130,000 a year to qualify to purchase the median home in North Carolina. But he pointed out that there's a problem with that, in that the median household income in North Carolina is about $67,000. So they're well short of that metric you really need to make to comfortably afford a home. And so that's really throwing a wrench in the gears as far as the market here. So they would need to build about 700,000 more residential units in North Carolina to actually meet the gap, because they have a shortage here. And meeting the gap is not as easy as just getting all of the supplies and construction workers necessary to do so, because they have to deal with a lot of things that get in the way. But at the outset is permitting. He noted that just to break ground on a home or a dwelling unit, an apartment or whatnot, going through the whole permit process before you can even start going vertical with your house is about 18 months.
Wow.
And so that really puts a lot of costs on a developer, because if they're considering things, they have to look 18 months, 24 months out to see, is this market going to be sustainable in that time period? What's the economy going to look like? If I start building homes now, or I start applying to build homes now, in 2 years, when I actually get construction underway and get close to actually attracting buyers, are there going to be buyers around? Is the economy going to have turned? So there are a lot of impediments in the way in that regard, but also zoning. So this is a local issue and not necessarily something that the state can do on a statewide basis, but many of us are familiar with zoning boards and different zoning regulations and how they can really put a lot of hiccups in development because certain areas of a town or county are actually relegated to only certain kinds of development. Or when you're building residential units, they may only allow for a certain level of density. And what they're calling for in North Carolina to meet this gap, to fill it, those 700,000 residential units, you really need to be able to do higher density builds in some of the urban counties especially. And that runs right into the zoning problems that you have with kind of local zoning control and the different kind of zones that get put in there. There's conditional zoning where developers can assume some risks, and the county says, yes, you can build more units on this particular plot of land than the regulation says, as long as you voluntarily meet all of these conditions. And some of the conditions will be completely they're not feasible at all for a developer to meet, or they're just not profitable. If they're going to meet those conditions, it won't make the project profitable, so they abandon a project like that. So Millis and the North Carolina Home Builders Association really emphasized smoothing out those regulations, getting a lot of the permitting to be as expedited as possible, getting the environmental regulations to make sense and they can be friendly towards home builders so that we can actually meet the gap, fill that gap in the homes and residential units we need across the state. And people in North Carolina can actually afford to buy a home. We would very much like to see the median home price and the median household income be at relative parity if you want everybody to be able to realize that dream of owning a home.
Yeah, talking about density, Jeff, obviously in many areas of our state, you look at some of our more urban areas, everything is kind of going outwards and upwards because there is a limited amount of land that is available. However, in many of these areas, there are huge discussions about not increasing this density. There's many communities that do not want more apartments, do not want more condo complexes. How do we manage that when you're talking about being 700,000 units short in terms of dwelling? That's a really tough issue.
Yeah, certainly, and people don't necessarily want a huge apartment complex going up on the property right next door to a bunch of their single family houses in the neighborhood they got, and it really changes the character of different communities. And so you have a lot of not in my backyard kind of sentiment around that. There are some things that you can do just to open it up for actual property owners to do things to like create accessory dwelling rights to where they can actually put up the mother-in-law suite that never got filled by the mother-in-law that's over the detached garage. That could actually be a unit that they rent out. So there are regulatory things that they can do statewide and that they can encourage toward local municipality regulators to make sure that they can give property owners the most freedom they need to actually increase the amount of residential units in that particular area. And some of the higher density projects aren't necessarily going to be in those suburban areas. So you have this suburban sprawl that's going on and is pushing neighborhoods further and further out into the rural parts of the counties, and kind of soaking all of that up. But you really want those higher density areas in the higher population areas. So where you have those NIMBY sentiments in city centers, like if you had it in around Raleigh and Wake County, around Charlotte and Mecklenburg, Durham, Chapel Hill, up in the northern part of the Triangle, those are the areas where you really need to loosen up some of the restrictions on density to make sure that you can actually get the units that you need. And then you actually won't have the demand to move further and further out to actually find affordable housing. If you get a job in Raleigh, but you can't afford to live in Raleigh, then you move to a neighborhood that's out in a county next door, in Johnston County, for instance. And so that's adding to the suburban sprawl that's going on there. But if you actually have higher density allowances in the city centers and the population centers, then you don't have that same pressure moving outward, and you can have a more orderly process there. But there's certainly there are no easy fixes. As a North Carolinian economist once said, Thomas Sowell, he says there are no solutions, there are only trade-offs, and that is very much true in the housing dilemma that we have here. We need to make sure that we can meet this demand, but we also don't want to destroy the character of all sorts of different communities. So there's going to be a balancing act among legislators, local regulators, and property owners going forward.
And again, I'm glad you brought up that local regulator part, because that's where a lot of these decisions are happening in your county or your city planning board. So hopefully folks will get more engaged in that. Jeff, there's a lot more that we don't have a chance to get into this morning. Where can folks go and read more details?
Yeah, head to CarolinaJournal.com. We're covering all of these oversight and committee meetings going on this week and more going forward with the budget session this year.
Jeff Moore joins us this morning on the Carolina Journal News Hour. It's 5:30, News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. Another look at your Friday morning commute, an update on traffic with Boomer Von Cannon.
Hey, thank you.
It's 5:37. You are listening to the Carolina Journal News Hour on WBT. Good Friday morning to you. We continue to track a busy week that was in Raleigh as the North Carolina House Oversight Committee met yesterday to brief lawmakers on their respective landscapes and efforts to find and eliminate waste, fraud, and abuse. The co-chair of that committee, House Majority Leader, Representative Brandon Jones. We talked about the Department of Revenue a little bit earlier on this morning. We'll now turn to the Office of State Budget and Management with Kristen Walker, who served as the state budget director since 2002. She informed lawmakers that the agency's priorities continue to focus on continued improvement as well as evidence-based focus. She told lawmakers, quote, "We're always looking for what is the evidence behind the program. Why are you running that program instead of a different program?" Said Walker, describing how OSBM helps agencies evaluate effectiveness and redirect funds from outdated and unproven initiatives. Walker was not able to identify examples of any waste the agency has targeted for elimination, but did tell the committee that OSBM is exploring tools like Microsoft Copilot in partnership with the Department of Information Technology to enhance efficiency and potentially identify waste, fraud, and abuse. Walker told the committee, quote, "We are in a partnership with DIT," that's the Department of Technology, "to look at ways in which we could use Copilot to evaluate a number of government things that also just become more efficient." Asked if the federal efforts to find and eliminate waste, fraud, and abuse via the Department of Government Efficiency are complicating state budget considerations, Walker revealed that the agency is monitoring some 2,600 federal grants amid potential cuts and preparing for localized economic impacts, particularly in university-heavy regions like the Triangle. Stateside, Walker was asked about recent forecast warnings of revenue shortfalls beyond 2026. She acknowledged the potential for budget gaps based on revenue and spending projections going forward, while also pointing out that current revenue levels are unprecedented. She told the committee, "Revenues are greater than they've ever been, right? We've enjoyed a lot of economic prosperity in this state, particularly post-pandemic. However, static modeling the agency conducts to predict future revenues is again flashing warning signals. Current revenue forecasts project $34.7 billion in the current fiscal year, $34.9 billion in the 25-26 fiscal year, and falling back to just $34.1 billion in the fiscal year 26-27. Walker told the committee by 2030, we're projecting a $4 billion gap between projected revenue and current services budgeted or population plus inflation budget. For context, warnings of revenue shortfalls have been frequent over the last decade at the state level, and fortunately, none of those shortfalls have come to fruition, and instead, revenue has surplused and that has occurred more often than not. When it comes to performance accountability, Walker assured the committee that OSBM tracks internal goals via a strategic plan and dashboard reviewed quarterly with staff performance tied to objectives. External accountability is shown, and that is done through a balance of budget and higher credit ratings. She concluded by saying, "You can see that we are doing our job and our primary mission when we have a balanced budget and the highest credit rating from all three credit rating agencies." We will continue to follow more reporting on the Oversight Committee, which also included testimony from the North Carolina Department of Motor Vehicle Commissioner Wayne Goodwin, who announced earlier this week that he would be stepping down from his job after 3 years with lots of frustration from lawmakers and drivers. That was a very contentious portion of that committee hearing yesterday. We'll continue to track details over at carolinajournal.com and right here on the Carolina Journal News Hour. Taking a look at some other statewide news this morning. something that we have been keeping an eye on over the last couple of months. Some new legislation filed earlier this week by House Majority Leader Brendan Jones of Columbus County may finally provide some help to over 1,000 homeowners who still need homes and help nearly a decade after Hurricane Florence and Matthew. House Bill 222, which is the Closeout Operations Providing Emergency Management Relief Act, a mouthful there, or the aptly named Cooper Accountability Act, would transfer $217 million from the State Emergency Response and Disaster Relief Fund to the Department of Public Safety, Office of Recovery and Resiliency, to complete the homeowners' recovery projects for Matthew and Florence. Jones told the Carolina Journal in an emailed statement, quote, "For 8 years, North Carolinians have endured Encore's mismanagement, broken promises, and endless delays. The Cooper Accountability Act puts an end to the chaos and forces real oversight while ensuring that every remaining recovery dollar is accounted for." He said oversight of this money will be strictly enforced, telling us, quote, "This bill allocates $217 million to finally complete the remaining homeowner recovery projects for Hurricane Matthew and Florence, but with strict accountability measures, including audits and real consequences for failure. This bill, we are not writing another blank check. This bill demands full transparency, delivers real results, and guarantees the disaster victims will never again be abandoned by their own government. Enough is enough," end quote from Representative Jones. Encore was formed in late 2018 by former Democrat Governor Roy Cooper shortly after Hurricane Florence slammed eastern North Carolina, and Hurricane Matthew also causing severe damage in some of the similar areas of the eastern part of our state back in 2016. Since September of 2022, the North Carolina General Assembly's Joint Legislative Hurricane Response and Recovery Subcommittee has held 5 hearings: September 2022, December 2022, March of 23, November of 24, and January of this year. Laura Hogshead, the former director of Encore, apologized at each of the meetings for the agency's slow process, adding that things would get better and that the committee would have her word on it. In addition to running severely behind in the completion of homes, at the November hearing last year, it was revealed that the agency was in the hole at the tune of $221 million. Days later, according to legislators, that figure would jump to $319 million. Encore and the saga for folks in eastern North Carolina has been a very rough road to recovery over the last, at this point, almost decade for some folks, going back to Hurricane Matthew in 2016. We will continue to follow Encore. We'll continue to track details on this Cooper Accountability Act and some of the details coming out of the General Assembly there. We'll keep an eye on it, not only over on our website, carolinajournal.com, but right here on the Carolina Journal News Hour, where it's now 5:45. News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. A final look at your Friday morning commute, an update on the roadways with Boomer Von Cannon, and a look at traffic this morning.
Hey, thank you.
Good morning again. It's 5:52. You're listening to the Carolina Journal News Hour on News Talk 1110 99.3 WBT. Continuing to track a busy week in Raleigh. A House Judiciary Committee on Tuesday approved House Bill 42, which is entitled Protect Those Who Serve and Protect Act of 2025. The bill enhances penalties on assaults on public safety officers, law enforcement, or search and rescue animals, and employees or volunteers at schools. Representatives Reese Pertel and Kelly Hastings showed the committee a video from last April of police officers in an intense exchange with pro-Palestinian protesters at UNC Chapel Hill. After the video was shown, representatives said, quote, "When I saw the video, I said, we need to file a bill about this." House Bill 52 defines public safety officers to include any of the 10 listed officers ranging from law enforcement to school staff to hospital employees. It also protects search and rescue and law enforcement animals that are subject to assault. The bill amends previous North Carolina law by adding new sections which contain the use of substance or laser devices. It also includes arson and other unlawful actions that can result in serious bodily injury for those responding officers. Chiefly, the bill increases punishments for, quote, felonious acts with deadly weapons with the intent to kill or inflict serious injury, raising the punishment from a Class E to a Class D felony. The new sections, including the use of substance and laser devices, would find offenders guilty of a Class 1 felony, the least serious type of felony in the state of North Carolina. The bill aims to clearly define and expand upon the penalties for assaulting first responders and other personnel. The existing statute found individuals guilty of a Class E felony, which is punishable by a standard sentence of 2 to 4 years of imprisonment. The listed officers only included law enforcement, probation or parole officers, and members of the North Carolina National Guard, or a person employed at a state or local detention facility. The changes to public safety officer encompasses a much wider range of individuals and increases their protection. The use of the language, quote, because of a person's status as a public safety officer in the bill addresses all of these individuals regardless of whether they are actively on duty. Some of the bill sponsors include introduced a similar but stricter bill, House Bill 61, with the exception of Hastings and Representative Tricia Cotham, who sponsored House Bill 52, but did not sponsor House Bill 61. Representative Carson Smith of Pender County and Dudley Green of Avery County took their places as the sponsor. House Bill 61 aims to increase penalties for assault on first responders by upgrading the offenses of a Class D felony to a Class B1 felony. This change would impose much harsher punishments, placing it on par with serious crimes like murder. However, that bill has a more narrow focus compared to House Bill 52, as it does not cover assault with the intent to kill or cause serious injury, nor does it apply to as many types of personnel as House Bill 52 does. The two bills were combined and presented as one at Tuesday's Judiciary Committee hearing. Representative Perel, who sponsored the bill, spoke of his drive to address felonious assaults against public safety officers, telling the committee, quote, I have attended many funerals for an officer's death in the line of duty, and every time I leave one of those services, I want to do something about it. So that maybe it won't be so soon before I have to attend another one. According to the National Law Enforcement Memorial Fund 2024 end-of-year law enforcement officer fatality reports, the number of officers killed in the line of duty increased by 25% in 2024. 147 federal, state, county, municipal, military, tribal, and U.S. territory officers died while discharging or attempting to discharge their duties last year. Firearms were the leading cause of death in law enforcement fatalities in 2024, with a 13% increase of officers killed by gunfire compared to 2023. In North Carolina, the lives of 5 officers were taken in the year 2024. We did also get some comments from the North Carolina Sheriff's Association. Eddie Cadwell, the head of that group, said, "You can imagine how you would feel if you were the victim and someone was throwing stuff or spitting on you. We appreciate our legislature and the bill sponsors with their support of law enforcement." You can read more details on this story by visiting our website, carolinajournal.com. And that's going to do it for a Friday edition. WBT News is next, followed by Good Morning BT. We are back with you Monday morning, 5 to 6, right here on News Talk 1110 and 99.3 WBT.